Buckeye Nation. It is time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I'm Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
And I apologize, Chip, for my voice to start this show. I am a little under the weather this week, a little fighting off a bug, and I'm going to do what I can to get through this program this week as we prepare for that team up north, because it is officially Rivalry week.
It is, and I hope you feel better, especially with Thanksgiving on the horizon. Nobody likes to be sick on such a sacred holiday, so follow doctor's orders. Whatever you do, drink lots of fluid, get plenty of rest, because you're going to need the grumpy old Buckeye at his very best come noon for that team up north on Saturday.
Yeah, maybe I got a little bit overextended this weekend with as much as I had to write for the grumpy old Buckeye, because Ohio State and Maryland was difficult, Chip. It was not what we expected, and in the end, it's a 52-51 victory in overtime for Ohio State. And man, you think back to what we thought might happen going into the Maryland game. We did talk last week that Maryland has some big play capability, that there were some things that the Terrapins do well that match up well with Ohio State. But did you ever in your life think that we would see something like what we saw on Saturday?
Oh, not even remotely close. I mean, when I think of not only our respective predictions, but almost every staff writer for the Ozone who had the opportunity to make predictions for Maryland. I mean, some of our coworkers were they were thinking, okay, Ohio State's going to blow Maryland out. And I started thinking, well, maybe I'm being overly pessimistic, because I had predicted 35-21. But right from the onset, Maryland, the fact that they were able to score so quickly and so easily on basically the exact same play in the very first few moments of the first quarter had me very, very concerned.
Yeah, a couple big plays by Anthony McFarland very early in the game, and Maryland stunning Ohio State after one quarter with a 17-3 lead, an 81-yard run, a 75-yard run. Basically, they just did what they wanted to, the Terps, in the first half in terms of running to the boundary side, with often with an unbalanced line toward the field side, and sometimes some motion thrown in as well. I just saw, the first play was, I think a negative play, and then I saw this lineup, and I saw the guy go in motion, and something in me went, there's no way they're running to that side. That's just way too much telegraphing that they're running to that side. Sure enough, 81 yards later, Maryland is leading, and Ohio State caught up in the wash was Damon Arnett, and it was Chip. It was just way too easy for Maryland in the early going.
Well, Damon, I believe it would be fair to say that when he returned to the sideline, the coaches were using, let's just say, I guess you would say, amplified volume to kind of express what they thought of Damon Arnett's positioning. That's one of the things that has been so overly concerning about this Ohio State defense this entire season, is that all it takes is for one player to be out of position. And what I was going to say is, as you said, McFarland, all he had was one man to beat, and that's all it took. And the next thing you know, like you said, Ohio State was down simply because that defensive scheme that has been driving you and I crazy, as well as all of Ohio State fans everywhere around the world, just wondering why the coaching staff can't adjust and will not adjust to getting the linebackers further off the line of scrimmage, as well as having the safeties in better position to assist in run support.
Yeah, we lauded Brendan White a couple of weeks ago, and he's taken over in a starting role, and he had a missed tackle on one of the long runs, and it is definitely scheme when one missed tackle is all it takes for a player to go 75 yards for a touchdown. There's no flow to the ball. There's no swarming defense that we've seen in years past, where It just seems like all 11 men are in on the tackle every play. There's just is nothing of that from this Buckeyes team, and we've seen it in the past, but it really did seem like, sure, Michigan State's offense was not good, and Nebraska is a team that doesn't have a great record, but it just seems like the last couple of weeks Ohio State started to figure it out, and then Maryland happened, and it was just it just brought back every bad memory we've had from the whole season defensively.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Michigan State, because last week on the podcast I confessed that part of my concern about the Maryland game and going forward was, all right, Ohio State did a great job shutting down Michigan State running the ball.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was with that caveat, okay, well, how good is Michigan State really? And then the fact that you brought up Nebraska, Nebraska, it didn't surprise me that Nebraska beat Michigan State, because back in the summer, I thought that there was a possibility that Michigan State was going to be physically depleted after playing Ohio State and would be just kind of worn down, so to speak, and Nebraska would take advantage of it. And I have to admit that that prediction was made when I thought Nebraska was going to be certainly better than they turned out to be record-wise. I certainly thought Michigan State was going to be better than they turned out to be. My point being that Michigan State offensively is even more woeful offensively than Ohio State is defensively. So congratulations, Ohio State. You were able to feast on a team that is actually worse than you on the opposite side of the ball. But getting back to the issue at hand, it is a scheme thing, and it's so frustrating that you and I as fans, as well as fans all across the country who listen to this podcast or any other Ohio State podcast, or when they turn on the television, they can see schematically Ohio State continues to do the same thing, and the results are the same. I mean, we're seeing the exact same kind of issues that plagued Ohio State in week one against Oregon State with long runs, and you would think, all right, you're going into the last couple weeks of the 2018 regular season, and you're still giving up substantially huge plays.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only imagine Urban Meyer at his press conference. I can't remember who asked it, and I can't remember precisely how they asked the question, but Urban Meyer, for lack of a better word, said that there have been very difficult conversations that he has had with the defensive staff. So I can only hope, and I can't stress that enough, that it is hope that the coaching staff is going to be put in the position of, listen, this is the scheme that I want you to run against that team up north. I don't want to see those linebackers on the line of scrimmage. I don't want to see safeties taking bad angles. This is what I want you to do. And I know Urban Meyer is not a defensive-oriented coach, but I know that in 2013, he did not like what he was seeing on the field, which resulted in substantial changes in the offseason. When you're going into the biggest game of the season, and it's no mistake that this is always the biggest game of the season for both teams, that I cannot imagine Urban Meyer is going to just say, okay, Coach Schiano, I'm going to just let you do what you want without insisting upon some changes schematically.
Yeah, and it was just aggravating to watch over and over in the first half, these big plays happening, and eventually Ohio State got a foothold in the game. Second quarter, Terry McLaurin goes 68 yards for a touchdown. That was nice to see. Maryland did answer with a touchdown, but then Dobbins scored to at least give Ohio State some momentum. It was a one touchdown game. Ohio State had the ball late in the second quarter, and Dobbins essentially fumbles, inside the 5-yard line, which killed a drive. And you think, if Ohio State scores there, as well as Maryland played in the first half, and as many things as Ohio State did wrong in the first half, that's your opportunity to say, to go into the locker room with some momentum. Maryland knows that they've done everything right, and Ohio State's done everything wrong, and they have to sit there through halftime knowing that they're tied and Ohio State's getting the ball to start the second half. Instead, Maryland gets a lift at the end of the quarter. Ohio State comes out, throws a pick six right away, and now Ohio State's fighting an uphill battle again. Now the good news is Ohio State's defensive scheme appeared to fix itself throughout most of the second half. The defense was much better against the run. They made some adjustments. I don't know why it took until halftime to make these adjustments. I'm not sure why these kinds of things can't get communicated to the players while the offense is on the football field, rather than wait till they're in the locker room. But for whatever reason, it took until halftime, and so you get a guy like McFarland who had over 200 yards rushing in the first half. He didn't reach 100 in the second half, so they did something right. You go into the third quarter. After that pick six, things didn't look good, but Ohio State bounced right back. Dwayne Haskins with an actual touchdown run. Then he hits KJ Hill with a touchdown pass to in the beginning of the fourth quarter. And then Ohio State's defense starts giving up big plays again. It's again we see instances of Kendall Sheffield with perfect coverage and yet not able to make plays, allowing a touchdown pass to Jashawn Jones, and but Ohio State kept chopping wood, kept fighting, scored again. Haskins just kept you get that ball down inside, and Haskins would run the ball. And it was something to see. The way Dwayne Haskins actually ran the ball in this game is not the way we've seen him run the ball all season.
No, it hasn't. I think I count me among the pleasantly surprised with seeing Dwayne Haskins running with authority. One of those touchdowns, I think you would agree with me, it was a fumbled snap near the goal line that fortunately Dwayne Haskins recovered and was able to pick up and run in for a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
Absolutely, Dwayne Haskins played with certainly with a lot more swagger with running the ball than we have seen this entire season. And I think if there's a positive of Dwayne Haskins running the ball is that going into the game, it's going to give Don Brown, who is, let's just say, if not the best, one of the best defensive coordinators in college football, it's going to give him more things to think about in terms of, do we want to have a spy? How do we want to handle this? Not that Dwayne Haskins is ever going to be confused with, Trace McSorley or any of the other mobile quarterbacks that Ohio State fans have grown accustomed to watching. But my point being that with Dwayne Haskins, that his mobility, that's kind of what I think I had anticipated all year, was a lot more of, if something isn't there, just tuck the ball, gain positive yardage. And without Dwayne Haskins in that game, let's face it, Ohio State loses, because you mentioned J.K. Dobbins. He was a total workhorse because of the unexpected injury to Mike Weber, went over 200 yards himself. It was nice to see that that J.K. Dobbins was able to run by when Ohio State needed him. It was also nice to see the emergence of Demario McCall. I know that a lot of the fans were kind of wondering why Demario McCall hadn't played a more substantial role. Now, Demario McCall, his biggest contribution, let's face it, was near the end of the game on a kickoff return that allowed Ohio State to actually kind of, I don't want to say breathe easier, because they didn't until the final play. But without Demario McCall playing as kind of giving J.K. Dobbins the occasional breather, Ohio State would have really been up the creek. The only thing I was going to chime in is when you were talking about McFarland, and you're absolutely correct. The Ohio State coaching staff made changes, and it is exasperating. Why does it take until halftime to make those changes? Ohio State was also the beneficiary of the fact that McFarland suffered some kind of an injury that kind of limited his effectiveness in the second half. I mean, he did come back late in the second half. He did contribute, but he was, even the announcers, they even brought up the dreaded Biaka Batuka term when they were talking about how close McFarland was getting to, setting an Ohio State opposition rushing record. So the defensive coaching staff, they're playing an opponent this coming weekend, and I know we're going to talk about them in greater detail, but they do not have the luxury of waiting till the half to figure out what is working and what is not. And that is kind of where everyone makes halftime adjustments, but this team is too good, and the possibility of getting down substantial points, they don't have that luxury and cavalier attitude, so to speak, of, oh, we can make adjustments at the half. No, figure out what you're doing, make adjustments. Something kind of scary to think about, and I'm sure this name will bring a shudder down your spine if you didn't hear it on Gerd and Tom Orr's immediate podcast after the game. But Tom Orr brought up, it kind of seemed like we were looking at a Bill Young defense, and that's all I had to think of. I mean, my mind immediately went back to that dreaded performance up in Ann Arbor. So my point being, my little, if you want to think of it, my tiff about poor defensive coaching and strategy is just kind of, I'm not sure if it's arrogance, if it's just defiance. I don't know what kind of mindset it is that you can continue to keep doing things that aren't working and go out and face the media and try to put a positive spin on it when everyone can see the results on the field.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about McFarland's injury. He missed about a series in that game. Javon Leake only had 6 carries in the game, and Fleet Davis only had 7, so there wasn't a lot of carries for the backs behind McFarland, but McFarland was tremendously effective, and he had the burst that some of those other backs didn't have. He was able to break some tackles those other backs weren't able to break. But I do think that Ohio State played better against the boundary side runs in the second half overall, and they were able to make some adjustments there. J.K. Dobbins was a workhorse, just unbelievable. 37 carries, 203 yards, and I didn't think that Ohio State would be able to run, have a 200-yard rusher. It was an unexpected thing to have no Mike Weber, and of course, with it being a travel game, you don't travel as many players. Maybe I don't know if Master Teague was unavailable. I would have actually liked to have seen a little bit more of DeMario McCall. He only carried 2 times, and he averaged 6 yards a carry. So he was able to be successful with the few times that they called on him. Very surprising that we didn't see more of Paris Campbell in the game. They didn't really make a very concerted effort to get him the ball, almost like they wanted to hide him from film for next week. But whatever the reason, this was absolutely Dwayne Haskins' game in front of his, a lot of family and friends, not too far from where he grew up. 28 of 38, 405 yards, 3 touchdown passes, only 1 interception that was deflected, and absolutely his fault because he stared down his receiver and tried to fit the ball into a tight window. Still required a heck of a play on the ricochet to intercept that and take it to the house. But also running for 59 yards and 3 more touchdowns. Just an unexpected day for Dwayne Haskins. That 59 yards rushing, probably more than his whole season total.
Easily, without even looking at Dwayne Haskins, without even having the stats in front of me for the season, I have no doubt whatsoever that surpassed Dwayne Haskins' rushing yardage for the season. And the only thing I was going to add in about DeMario McCall, and again, this is something that was brought up, one of those carries by Dwayne Haskins, be careful what you wish for kind of a thing, is here you and I are praising Dwayne Haskins, deservedly so, for those 59 yards. One of those carries that Dwayne Haskins decided to keep instead of giving it to DeMario McCall, somebody made the point, he gives it to DeMario McCall, and there was a play. It was to the right side, and DeMario McCall went out. You could picture it too.
Yep.
So he went taking off, and I was thinking, and then all of a sudden, no, so you have to take the good with the bad, and I'm grateful for Dwayne Haskins for kind of showing everybody that yes, he can run. It's never going to be as effective as JT Barrett. I freely admit that. But I'm also happy to see that perhaps the willingness to run isn't as strong as you or I or any other Ohio State fan would like, but he can do it, and I'm extremely confident that this week against that team up north, that his legs as well as that powerful right arm are certainly going to be needed in order for Ohio State to win this game.
Absolutely. I can picture in my mind the one you're talking about. You know, every quarterback that runs an option, whether it's whatever kind of zone option plays you're talking about, they're going to make bad reads from that, every now and then. And he certainly could have given that to McCall for probably all of the yards, but instead he kept.
Yes.
But
Right.
there are those. I was watching Oklahoma State, and I saw a little bit of the same out of their quarterback a few times, and it just seems like every time you have a run pass option or a zone read option, sometimes the quarterback makes the wrong read. And JT Barrett did it make the wrong read at times as well, but he was much more comfortable in that situation and made the better read more often than not. Um, so and then of course you're also going to have times when running the ball is not the right call. There was a play that it maybe it was a pass play. It certainly did look like a quarterback draw, and it was a terrible call if it was a quarterback draw because Haskins ran into Demetrius Knox and fumbled the ball. There were a number of
Oh, that was ugly.
there were a number of ugly plays in the game. I don't think that Dobbins fumbled before his knee hit, but there was no clear view of it on the replay. There was none of the angles showed where his knee was when the ball came out. I think it's one of those cases where no matter what they rule it, it can't be overturned. And so you look at his fumble, you look at the interception, you look at the Haskins fumble, and all of these things kept Maryland out in front throughout the course of the game. And I just kept thinking that if Ohio State could just get out of its own way, it will take the game, and eventually these mistakes have to stop happening, and these bounces have to stop happening. This is just a crazy game, and then the the Okonkwo touchdown happens, and I'm like, okay, well maybe it's not possible to win this game because that's one of those things where Ohio State makes the correct play, they stop McFarland, they even cause a fumble, and the ball goes into the end zone, and a teammate jumps on it, and because of college football having a rule book that has a few really idiotic rulings in it, Maryland gets to keep the ball and have the touchdown rather than the ball coming back to the spot of the fumble. So Maryland takes the lead with a 141 remaining, and like you mentioned, a nice big kickoff return for Demario McCall, and that sets Ohio State up in really good situation. Benjamin Victor with an unbelievable grab on an unbelievable throw, with 40 seconds left in the game, goes into overtime, where of course as we all expected, Dwayne Haskins ran 5 yards for a touchdown. And then Maryland scores, but it's overruled on replay. They score, and again, it looks like replay is going to overturn that. But then, for whatever reason, there's no review on the second one for Fleet Davis scoring from 1 yard out. And as everybody is trying to figure out, are they going to stop the play to look at it again? They run the 2-point conversion. Maryland gets away with an offensive lineman going downfield and picking off a defensive back, but luckily Tyrell Pigram misses his receiver and the ball falls incomplete, and Ohio State completes the victory. On a scale of 1 to 10, how bitter would you have been had that 2-point conversion been been converted, given the fact that they had offensive linemen down into the end zone blocking for their wide receiver?
A 12.
Right.
It would have been. I mean, because as soon as the replay came up, and I in confession mode here, I was with my wife and my two brothers-in-law at a bar watching the game, and all of us, that collective exhale of can't believe Ohio State survived and pulled this one out, and they played so terribly throughout the game, but they were able to do what they needed to do to win. And all of a sudden, looking at the replay on the big screen television at the bar where we were at, my brother-in-law Kevin and I looked at each other like, that's offensive lineman downfield, and of course that it was the type of thing where not only was there no penalty called, like you said, it was the kind of thing where, all right, there should have been a penalty called on the 2-point conversion, which Ohio State naturally would have declined, right? But of course, there was no penalty called, and there would have been since there was no penalty, there wouldn't have been a replay. I mean, all this stuff. So I would have been absolutely livid. It was fortunate for Ohio State that, as you said, Pigrom was inaccurate on the play, but it was just mind numbing how easily Ohio State, when they scored to take the lead in overtime, it was the mere fact that Maryland on the very first play in their overtime possession was able to score. It was just inconceivable to me, to borrow from The Princess Bride. It was just, I couldn't understand how easily Maryland was carving up the Ohio State defense. Fortunately, like you said, Ohio State was able to survive and withstand the 2-point conversion and come out with a 1-point win and get ready for that team up north.
Sometimes you have to win a game like this in a season. I mean, you look back through the years and you look at games like Holy Buckeye, you look at other overtime games, and you go, there's no reason for this game to have happened, but at least Ohio State came out on top. It was crazy. It was maddening. I mean, Ohio State had 36 first downs to Maryland's 18. Ohio State went for 688 yards, and still, it took an incomplete pass on a 2-point try to put Maryland away, and that's not something that either of us expected. We expected a double-digit victory for Ohio State, and credit to Matt Canada for having his team ready to play, because they were really fired up to start that game. They did nothing to come down off that cloud after a couple of big plays early. And when Ohio State did start to punch them back in the second half, they were able to throw some more haymakers and stay either level or ahead late in the game. At one point, Ohio State came back and it looked like finally the Buckeyes were starting to roll. And then for whatever reason, Damon Arnett decided not to cover a receiver, and he got in behind. That was another one of those where they at first ruled it a touchdown, and it as they saw the replay, it came back to the one, but they scored anyway. Just a crazy, nutty game, and I'm glad it's over, Chip. Quite frankly.
Oh, so I am too, and I agree with you on the compliments to Matt Canada. I certainly have no stake in the final decision. I certainly believe Matt Canada should be in the running for the head coach position there, considering all of the turmoil that Matt Canada has been able to kind of successfully navigate for this 2018 season. It would not be surprising to me if Maryland defeats Penn State this weekend. I'm not sure how much gas they have left in the tank. When you lose a close one like that, sometimes it can be just psychologically devastating that they might not be able to come back from it. My point about Maryland beating Penn State, though, is rooted in the fact that Penn State did not look overly impressive in their defeat of Rutgers. So maybe Maryland, they can go to State College and pull out a win to get to that 6th win and get themselves to a bowl game.
I have to chuckle a little bit because I am looking at the statistics of the game on the Ohio State website, and J.K. Dobbins is credited with a sack.
Yeah, when did that? I saw the same thing earlier. When did that happen?
And Chase Young is also credited with a sack for a different yardage amount. So I'm assuming that they meant Chase Young both times, and I don't know where this came from. I assume that it will get fixed because I mean that's a pretty special play by J.K. Dobbins, not being on the field and getting a sack. So.
But that's one of those things. I'm being completely honest here. Is I remember late in the game Chase Young having a sack
Right.
that was crucial. I don't remember him having two
Yeah, I
sacks.
don't
And
either.
even Urban Meyer said how Chase Young had two sacks at his press conference. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't remember him having two sacks. I remember the one, and he immediately kind of did the muscle pose, and that's all fine and good. And there were for all of the fair or unfair shots that Tough Borland has taken, he had some crucial moments as well. But I think overall, I think a lot of Ohio State fans, based on the fact, as you said, Maryland, they put up all that rushing yardage. They put up 51 points. The fact that any of the players were named as champions by the defensive staff was very puzzling, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, even Draymond Jones, I think, who had a pretty decent day. I probably wouldn't even have named a champion in this game.
I agree.
Anyway, Ohio State survives, and that's the key thing. What did you make of? I don't know if you could hear the commentators in the bar where you were, but what did you make of the fact that they gave any airtime at all to Brett McMurphy's ridiculous story about, how Urban Meyer condoned and covered up racism amongst his staff? I mean, that was a story that, it came out early in the week, and everyone, the administration, even players, everybody came out against this story as it being preposterous. A very strong reaction from the Ohio State community, that it never happened. It was a very questionably sourced story, and yet the ABC ESPN broadcast crew spent some time on it.
Well, since you asked, I couldn't really hear comments from the other people within the bar, so I don't want to, I don't want to do a McMurphy and claim, oh, this and that, when the reality is that was not the case. But I am solely in the mindset that you discussed as well in the Grumpy Old Buckeye column, that the mere fact that all these other reputable journalists immediately condemned Brett McMurphy, besides just the 100% in unison response by Ohio State from not only Urban Meyer, not only from the players, but even from the administration, from the Ohio State President Drake, who is not well liked or respected by the Ohio State football fan community. The fact that it's been a unified voice of condemnation for Brett McMurphy's poor sourcing, for the website to even publish it. I think that it's pretty much a non-story anymore, because with all of the focus that's going to be on the game as well as it should be for this coming Saturday, I really don't think that fire is going to spread anymore. I don't think any more air is going to be given to it.
Yeah, you brought up the who seemed at odds with Urban Meyer in the preseason when the Zach Smith stuff was going on, and it seemed that maybe he even was pushing for Meyer to be fired, if not suspended for the entire season. But even he came out strongly in favor of Urban Meyer on that story, and you could read between the lines on Trevon Grimes liking some of the responses from his former teammates, um, and from some of the other journalists. Uh, the fact that he liked those comments seemed to indicate that he was definitely not on the same page as McMurphy on this story. I just thought it was curious that they gave it really any play at all, given the fact that it was so widely and resoundingly squashed by the entire community. But they felt like they needed to air that out and give it a national platform. That was just disappointing to me.
I agree with you.
All right, Chip. Let us turn our attention toward the thing that we essentially spend all of the off season thinking about. which is the game, and the very next game is coming up this Saturday in Columbus. Ohio State will finally be done with its road trip, and the Buckeyes are facing a team that, you know, just a few weeks back, the Buckeyes probably would have been favored in this game. But given the way that Ohio State's season has gone, given the way Michigan's season has gone, the Wolverines actually enter Columbus as road favorites.
For the first time since 2004, and believe it or not, to me, that's one of the intangibles that I believe favor Ohio State. It is. We're not. I don't want to get into the predictions as of yet, but I think that there are certain things that when you look at this game, and it's very, very difficult to look at it objectively as Ohio State fans. There are certain areas where Michigan, excuse me, I'm going to have to do 10 push-ups now because I used the word. But in all sincerity, why it makes complete sense for that team up north to be the favorite. But the fact that for the first time since 2004, for Ohio State to be the underdog in their own home stadium, I think that's going to be an intangible that is going to actually benefit the Buckeyes.
One of the things we've seen throughout Urban Meyer's career is that when he plays a ranked team as an underdog, he usually has his team pretty fired up and pretty ready to play.
Absolutely.
This year has been a very difficult year in a lot of ways, just going back to that preseason and that suspension and that time that Urban Meyer was not able to bond with his team and to be there on a day-to-day basis to make evaluations, and some of that stuff that had to been done in his absence, which may have led to things like, for example, Brendan White not starting until late in the season. It's been a very rocky season, and I think a lot of that can be traced back to that suspension in the spring, or in the fall, in the training camp. And now Ohio State comes in here with a very, I guess you could say it's a dominating offense. Certainly, in terms of points per game and yards per game, Ohio State very high nationally, highly ranked nationally. But you're playing against a Michigan defense ranked number 1 in total defense, only allowing just under 235 yards per game. By all accounts, it doesn't seem like, even amongst Ohio State fans, that a lot of people are giving the Buckeyes a chance to win this game. And it almost seems like, are we being fooled here? Are we being, obviously everybody expects the team that's struggled all year to struggle in this game, but are we forgetting the history of this game, Chip, in which one team can be an absolutely dominant team, the other team can go 500, and that means absolutely nothing when the two teams kick off against each other?
I do think that there's a lot of the fan base that is grown spoiled. If spoiled might be pretty harsh of a term, but complacent with the way that they approach this rivalry, because for the last 18 years, let that sink in, for the last 18 years, Ohio State fans have grown accustomed to being on the winning side of this. And it certainly seemed, as you said, at the beginning of the season, that Ohio State would have been the logical favorite in this game. But I completely agree with you. I think there are so many fans who forget that there have been times where Ohio State has not been the dominant team going into this and was still able to come away with the win and ruin, if not ruin, cause some severe damage to that team up north's bowl destination, to the final outcome of the Big Ten championship, all those kind of things. So I know that you and I are kind of comparable age and memory, that I'm certainly not going to overlook the fact that there have been times where it seems like one team has all of the the belief and confidence and reasons to be the favorite, and have seen Ohio State come out and be on the losing end of it. I mean, we talked earlier about Bill Young, like that 1995 loss, 1996. I mean, I realize I'm going back 20 plus years, but I can still vividly see those. I'm sure you can too. Like, there were a lot of times where Ohio State was the superior team. So, and then fortunately, during the Jim Tressel era, the pendulum swung dramatically in Ohio State's favor.
Hmm.
And I think of in 2001, that was a case where if Ohio State, they were starting their backup quarterback for the first time up in Ann Arbor, and for the first time in 15 years was able to pull out a win. So it's not as though the dog is, pulling the win is unheard of or doesn't happen. It's just that I think, getting back to my point, that I think over the last 18 years, I think Ohio State fans have become complacent with being not only the favorite but also the superior team and coming out on the winning end. And this is kind of one of those rare occurrences where Ohio State fans may have to recognize the fact that, yeah, we should be the underdog going into this game.
Yeah, and the underdog in this game, obviously, in years past, has meant very little. These teams have created one of the great rivalries in all of sports just for that reason, because they have spoiled the other team's season any number of times. Now, you look at Ohio State's season and Michigan's season. Who has the better opportunity to play spoiler here would be Ohio State. Michigan is obviously highly ranked. They're in position to make the college football playoff. Ohio State, even when the Buckeyes win, they slip down the standings. It would be interesting to see just how far a win over Michigan would cost Ohio State in the rankings.
Absolutely. And that's kind of, to me, that's one of the things that I think the intangibles, being the underdog, favors Ohio State. The fact is, for the first time in a great while, the pressure is actually on that team up north. In 2001, Ohio State was able to knock the Wolverines from winning the Big Ten championship. And Illinois went on to play an LSU team in the Sugar Bowl, coached by a guy named Nick Saban at the time. So in 2004, it didn't result in the Wolverines lose. They had tied for the Big Ten championship. They went to the Rose Bowl, lost to Vince Young in Texas, but it was the fact that Troy Smith had a coming out party. They came out and they played like they had nothing to lose. Within the first opening minute of the game, Troy Smith hit a redshirt freshman wide receiver from the mean streets of Avon Lake, Ohio, a newly elected United States congressman by the name of Anthony Gonzalez, for a 68-yard touchdown. So the fact is, relish the fact that you are the underdog. Urban Meyer certainly is. Behind closed doors, I'm sure that he is pushing all the right buttons and poking, the players' collective pride, and he's going to have these guys ready to go on Saturday afternoon at noon.
Yeah, if it would be nice to see that this entire season has been a masterclass in trolling Michigan by intentionally playing poorly all season long to lull them into a false
I'm not
sense
going
of
to go that
security.
far.
I'm just saying it would.
I'm not going to go that
would
far.
be great if they came out and steamrolled Michigan and said, yeah, we were just kidding. All those games we were keeping it close. The Purdue thing, yeah, we knew that wouldn't
Exactly.
cost us. Um,
Right.
yeah, so let's take a look at Michigan for a moment. We mentioned the top ranked defense in the nation, 234.8 yards per game against the number one pass defense in the nation, allowing only 123 yards per game. That would seem to fly in the face of Dwayne Haskins having a big day, but Maryland was a very highly ranked pass defense, and he did quite well against them. Made just one mistake, but largely picked them apart. And I think, quite frankly, Chip, that had Ohio State taken more shots over the top, Dwayne Haskins could have had a lot more yards and a lot more touchdowns. But we continue to see some more conservative type routes and some more conservative type play calling, even in the pass game. The Wolverines are 23rd. I'm sorry, they're 14th against the run, 111.64 yards per game, and their scoring defense fourth in the country, allowing just 13.5 points per game. Go ahead with what you were going to say.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of the passing game for Ohio State, I certainly hope that they will take their shots downfield. What is concerning to me going into Saturday is during the Maryland game, Ohio State's left tackle Thayer Munford had to leave the game due to injury. Josh Alabi came in. He performed as well as he could, but that concern is overlaid against the fact that Ohio State is going to be playing up against Rashawn Gary at one defensive end. It still remains to be seen if Chase Winovich, he sustained an injury against Indiana, if he's going to be able to go. But Thayer Munford being able to give Dwayne Haskins enough time for those longer pass patterns to develop is going to be one of those, I don't want to say one-on-one battles, but the performance of Isaiah Prince over the last month, let's face it, has not been at its best.
Mm-hmm.
So the performance of Isaiah Prince, and still to be determined in terms of health, Thayer Munford against very quality pass rush from the Wolverines is going to be something that's going to factor tremendously into the Ohio State passing game.
All right. Offensively, Michigan goes out and gets Shea Patterson in the offseason. Took a while to get him considered eligible. He was supposed to fix Michigan's problems because they've had trouble with the quarterback position. You hear a lot about him, but if you look at Michigan's passing offense, they're only ranked 87th in the country with 210 yards per game passing. Which 210 yards per game passing is not bad, but it's not very highly ranked in the national scheme of things. Run offense, 23rd in the country. Good rushing offense, again partly because Patterson can run the ball, 219 yards per game. Scoring offense, 24th in the country, 36.6 points per game, and total offense, 47th at 429.6 yards per game. 400 yards on offense on average is not bad considering what that defense allows. That is going to allow for a lot of lopsided games.
Yes, they are certainly capable of running the ball, and little surprise there from Ohio State fans. They have this offensive line coach by the name of Ed Warner. I think you may have heard of him, Michael. Ed Warner is in charge of their offensive line, so that's not a surprise that they're able to run the ball very well. Karan Higdon earlier today, and I'm not sure how much you can get too much in terms of bulletin board material. He guaranteed a win against Ohio State, but it was in response to a question from a reporter. It wasn't nearly the kind of thing where he was just being overly boastful. When you're asked about it, I think it's not nearly to the same kind of declarative statement as Jim Harbaugh made 30 plus years ago when he guaranteed a win. So I'm sure Urban Meyer is going to certainly make hay out of that statement.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I think the psychological stuff that can only work for so long. It's kind of that old Mike Tyson line about everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. The psychological stuff, I think, wears off pretty fast, I would imagine, when you're running down on kickoff and somebody comes up from the opposition and lays a good block into you. I think all that psychological stuff kind of has a way of kind of going out of mind. So I think it truly comes down to the Ohio State coaches making the adjustments schematically to combat that very effective Wolverine running game.
Yeah, I'm not sure what a player is supposed to say when asked, "Hey, do you guarantee a win?" You're certainly you have two choices there, and neither of them are particularly good, but you have to pick one, and Higdon picked one there, and that's probably the only one that you can pick in the end of the day. Do I guarantee a win? Nah. You know what? You're not going to come off looking very good to your teammates or your fans if you do that. So, um, I agree with you. So, what do you see as the key to this game, and what is your score prediction for the game?
Okay. Everything leads me, in terms of trying to look at this as objectively as I can, leads me to everything favors that team up north, and it would make sense to pick them. But I keep going back to the fact that I think first and foremost the pressure is on that team up north. It's not on Ohio State, and that kind of leads into my thinking is if I'm Ohio State schematically on offense, kind of what you just said, go over the top, play like you've got nothing to lose. I mean, you truly, if you go into it with that kind of mindset, almost like that 2004 team had, of
Mm-hmm.
just kind of playing with reckless abandon. Hopefully, the Ohio State coaching staff is going to play with tempo, try to get that defense out of when they're not fully in position, and regardless of whether it's with a run or pass, gain positive yardage. Stay committed to that running game, even though I'm sure that going is going to be tough, especially early, because as you said, that defense is stout. And defensively, hopefully they're making adjustments schematically. But I really believe that when you think of the pressure, I think of the intangibles that Urban Meyer can draw upon from his psychology background, and have these guys ready to play up that disrespect card, do all that kind of stuff behind the scenes. I think Ohio State has enough. Let's face it, Ohio State has. This is not a team lacking in talent. That's probably why the frustration comes in when we think about the defensive lapses. Is that
Mm-hmm.
these are very heavily recruited guys that are just not playing well. I think Ohio State has enough to do, has enough in the tank to keep this close in the fourth quarter, and I think that's when that team up north, they start to think, here we go again, like we can't beat these guys. And I think that's enough to that self-doubt can, as long as they keep it close, they weather the storm. I think Ohio State late in the fourth quarter, they do enough. They establish the running game just enough, and Ohio State ekes out a close win, 31-28.
Okay. Yeah, I think the key here is Ohio State can't get behind like it did against the Penn State, against the Penn State game or the Maryland game. I think Ohio State has to go toe to toe in this game. I think it's going to be one of those hard hitting games. Maybe some personal fouls along the way from both teams. It's going to be chippy. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be one of those November slugfests. I'm going to I'm going to sort of say here that I'm going to trust in what Urban Meyer has been able to do against ranked teams as an underdog. And even though there's no reason that anyone uh, who have watched anyone that's watched both teams play this year should necessarily expect Ohio State to come out and win this game, I'm going to say Ohio State somehow finds a way to get it done at home, and I'm going to say 26-24 in a lower scoring game than you would expect. I don't think that Michigan's got some good run. I don't think they have the breakaway type of running back that Anthony McFarland is, the big home run hitter. They're certainly going to probably hit one at some point, but I think that Ohio State somehow puts it all together, and they all play like their hair is on fire this weekend, and Ohio State gets the victory and goes on to play at Northwestern.
Like it. That'd
All
be
right.
awesome.
Well, we'll see. We'll be back to talk about it next week. We'll talk about Ohio State's and Michigan and the latest edition of the rivalry game, and um, I think we'll see how many players got stepped on the field,
It was a cheap shot for all
intentionally or
everyone.
unintentionally or whatever.
Right, for all of the complaining about Chase Winovich's injury, that old people in glass houses kind of statement.
Yeah.
Look at how he did. So never want to see anyone get hurt, but something. I'm no fan of people that take cheap shots, and that's basically what he did that led up to his injury as well.
All right. Before we go, Chip, how can people find you on the internet?
On Twitter, I can be found at Chip Minnick, Minnich. You may notice a very bright, prominent red X on my profile when you send me a tweet, but that's how you would contact me. And like the grumpy old Buckeye here, I contribute to the Hayes and Cannon section of the Ozone, and I'm also a contributor for Athlon Sports.
All right, yes, you can read the Grumpy Old Buckeye at theozone.net in the Hayes and Cannon section. I am at Mike36fan on Twitter. I do not allow Michigan to dictate what I do with my letter M, because my letter M has existed long before the University of Michigan. And besides, X's are worth more in Scrabble, so why would I give them one of those?
There you go.
I don't give away points. That's not what I'm about. All right, you can please read our stuff at theozone.net. Check out all of our shows on the Ozone Radio Network, including the Buckeye Weekly Podcast with Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr, the Buckeye Sloopcast, and the Sons of Schmidt. You can catch us all week long, and please subscribe, and please, we welcome your star ratings and your reviews on iTunes. We'll be back to do it next week. Remember, kids, you don't need to go on a revenge tour if you don't have a period of mediocrity. And we will be back to do it next week, and hopefully we will be talking about another big win in the rivalry game. So until then, go Bucks!
Go Bucks!